Thank you so much. I am quite pleased that technology is on my side today, knock on wood, that it continues that way. All right, so yes, today I'll be talking about a little bit of my doctoral research, which looked at adolescence more broadly. And today I'm just going to be focusing on the biological changes of puberty. But before I get into that, I want to start with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that McMaster University is situated on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples in the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and that I live on the lands now known as the Haldeman Tract. And as a settler on these lands, I acknowledge that I am part of these treaties and that I have a lot of work to do in order to contribute to their success moving forward. So I'm sure we're all very aware with what puberty is, but for those who may have blocked it from their memories, puberty is a period of rapid growth and development characterized by the development of secondary sexual characteristics and the pubertal growth spurt. And clinical research today is showing that puberty is not a standalone event, but really helps encapsulate the early life experiences and lays the foundation for adult outcomes. So it's really important for understanding the entire human life course. Additionally, in a number of societies, puberty serves as this kind of social marker of impending adulthood and fertility and everything that goes along with it. So I argue that really, in order to understand childhood or adulthood or the transitions between them, we first need to understand puberty a little bit better. Now, in the Roman Empire, we can learn a little bit about puberty through literary sources, which discuss kind of how the Romans conceptualized of puberty, as well as ages when key milestones occurred. But the problem is that literary sources are often heavily biased as they reflect the opinions or experiences of wealthy men living in and around the Roman core, meaning we don't really know what puberty necessarily looked like for women or lower and middle class folks, which make up the vast majority of the Roman Empire. So we have this very narrow view of what it looks like. And so from my research, I wanted to look at puberty more broadly, see what it may have been like for the rest of the population or more of the population. And so in this presentation, I want to focus on two research objectives. And the first was to identify patterns of pubertal timing for middle-class individuals in the Roman Empire. And the second was to compare this osteological data I gather with the literary evidence and try to understand where some of these potential differences or similarities might be coming from. To conduct this research, I looked at two osteological collections. The first comes from Portus, which is the main port servicing Rome through much of the Roman Empire. So it was responsible for a lot of shipments of grain and goods and even people coming in. And it's predominantly middle class. So there's a lot of trade and fishing, a lot of freedmen and migrants. And the necropolis of Isola Sacra is located just outside the city walls, kind of between Portus and Ostia. And was used between the 1st and 5th centuries CE. The second site I looked at was in Roman Gaul from the late Roman period. So the site is Nova Magnis Lex Viorum. And this was also a trade center, but located more inland. So it kind of facilitated trade from the coast into Roman Gaul more broadly. But again, it is predominantly middle class. With evidence of trade, farming, as well as an artisanal district and a possible military garrison, which is interesting. The necropolis of Lisieux-Michelet was used for a really long time from about the 4th to 11th centuries, so the Roman and Merovingian periods. But for this study, I only looked at individuals associated with the Roman context. For the analysis of the human remains, I conducted age at death estimates using a wide variety of methods to try to get the most accurate and precise aging that I could. And I also used a number of methods for estimating biological sex, including pelvic and cranial dimorphism for the older individuals, the unfused ilium and mandible, cautiously for the younger individuals, distal humerus for pretty much anyone with an elbow. And then I also used peptide analysis, which Sterling introduced yesterday, so I don't have to go into it with a lot of detail. But we applied this for the youngest individuals in this study in order to get at the X and Y chromosomes and kind of more reliably assess their biological sex. Pubertal stage at death was conducted following Chaplin and Lewis, and menarchal status following Buell and Pyle. And of the a little over 2,000 skeletons represented in these two osteological collections, about 12% met the different parameters I set to be included in this study. So they were between the ages of 8 and 25, they had some kind of indication of biological sex, and they had at least 3 indicators of their pubertal stage at death. And in this pie chart, you can see kind of the breakdown of that sample based on the 5 stages of puberty, starting with pre-puberty in the dark blue, going clockwise all the way to post-puberty. And so for the first 4 stages, they're relatively evenly balanced. Post-puberty is, however, obviously the largest one represented here. All right, so some results. When we're looking at pubertal timing for males and females, we can see that puberty occurs roughly between about 9 and 20 years of age. So it's not significantly offset from what we see in modern populations, but it is much longer than we see in modern populations. Females appear to enter the acceleration stage, so the very first active stage of puberty, at a younger age than males. But males seem to catch up to the females by the deceleration stage. So they're entering that stage around the same age. And this actually corresponds quite well with the clinical literature that suggests females enter into puberty at a younger age than males. So it's kind of this little check mark that we had done something right, that we were on the right track. This might actually work. It was really reassuring to see. When comparing the 2 sites, however, there are no significant differences in any of the 5 stages of puberty, which was really surprising to me considering the differences between these 2 sites, that they're separated by about 500 years and 1,500 kilometers. There's different religious and political influences, but ultimately they're both middle-class populations. And so maybe that's the overriding theme here as to why their pubertal timing patterns are quite similar. Moving on to the second objective, I wanted to compare this literary and osteological evidence. And so that's what I'm going to do over the next couple of slides. And so for males in the literary evidence, different authors talk about that the breaking of the male voice, or to crow, and spermatogenesis, so the first ejaculation, occurs around 15 years of age for males. And today we know that those are key characteristics of peak height velocity, or PHV, which is the middle stage of puberty. And in this study, PHV was achieved around 15 years of age, and you can see the results for the 2 sites listed at the bottom here. And to me, so this suggests that these 2, the osteological and the literary evidence, kind of match here. Literary evidence also suggests that for young men, the growth ends around the age of 21, and that this is around the time they're also able to grow a full beard. And the Romans are very clear that the full beard is different from the first beard, which is just kind of like a little fuzz, but the full beard is your nice thick beard, I guess. And so this ability to grow the full thick beard would happen after puberty. And in this study, everyone aged 20 or older was defined as post-pubertal. So again, these seem to match with the osteological and literary evidence for males. Looking to females, the results seem to be a little bit different. So different literary sources talk about breast budding occurring at 12 years of age, which again is a defining characteristic of the acceleration stage, that first active stage. But in this study, both females at Isola Sacra and Lisieux-Michelet entered the acceleration stage at 11 years of age, so just a little bit younger than what these literary sources are suggesting. Menarche was said to have occurred at 14 years of age, menarche being the first menstruation. But in our study, that happened a little bit later, around 15 to 16 years of age. And so we're seeing this slight offset in females between the osteological and literary evidence, where females in this study appear to enter puberty a little bit earlier and experience menarche a little bit later than the literary sources. And so this raises the questions to me of why do the male osteological and literary evidence seem to match, but the females don't quite match? And the first possibly obvious explanation is that the literary sources are written by men who probably have an intimate knowledge of male puberty, having experienced it themselves, their friends, their their cohort, their colleagues all having experienced it, they'd probably have a better understanding of that. Whereas for females, they might be writing from a more limited perspective or just making more vague assumptions about when these transitions occurred. Alternatively, these results could actually be meaningful differences, suggesting that there are different pubertal timing patterns for middle-class females, as represented by the osteological evidence, and higher-class females, as represented by the literary evidence. And I'm inclined to go with this second interpretation, not only because it's more exciting, but because we also know that middle-class females married at a later age than higher-class females. And so if we think of this kind of delayed social transition as well as a delayed biological transition with menarche, those two kind of line up with one another, suggesting that there might be something here. And so I wanted to dive into that interpretation a little bit more and to try to understand why we might be seeing different pubertal timing patterns. I had to look at a bunch of clinical literature to see what we know about puberty today and what kind of affects our pubertal timing. And spoiler, there's a million things that affect pubertal timing, which is why a lot of researchers are now kind of using it as this measure of physiological and psychosocial stress. So there's just so much going on that we kind of encapsulate it all as physiological and psychosocial stress. In particular, different clinical studies have shown that greater early life stress, so within the period of childhood, is associated with early pubertal onset, like we see with females in this study, and that greater peripubertal stress, so around the time of puberty, is associated with delayed menarche, like we see for females in this study. And so if we take that and apply it to the ancient Romans, we might be able to say then that middle-class females experienced greater levels of stress compared to higher-class females, whereas middle-class males experienced similar levels of early life stress compared to higher-class males. And to me, this then suggests that it's the compound effects of being both middle class and female that contributed to experiences of early life and peripubertal stress, which ultimately altered their pubertal development, suggesting that we really need to start considering these cross-cutting variables of identity within childhood, like we are doing in adulthood, because these different cross-cutting identity variables could impact early life experiences in childhood, which could then have ramifications for adult experiences as well. So to tie that back up, in case you zoned out at any point, the first objective was to identify patterns of pubertal timing for middle-class individuals in the Roman Empire. And what we found through this osteological analysis is that puberty occurred between about 9 and 20 years of age, with females experiencing the acceleration stage at a younger age than males. However, there were no significant differences between the two osteological collections. For the second objective, we wanted to compare the osteological data with literary evidence and try to understand where some of these differences or similarities might be coming from. And I suggest that the male osteological and literary evidence seem to match, suggesting similar experiences of early life stress for both middle and higher class males. However, middle-class females experienced both early pubertal onset and delayed menarche, suggesting some kind of greater exposure to both early life and peripubertal stress than higher-class females. And so I would just encourage anyone looking at childhood in Roman Empire or really any other context to further consider these cross-cutting variables of identity within childhood in order to try to get a broader understanding of lived experiences in the Roman Empire. And lastly, I just want to thank my co-authors and Luca, Alessandra, and Cecile for access to these osteological collections and the funding agencies that supported it. And then very last slide is works that I cited, as well as some contact information there if you want to chat, because I'm always happy to chat more.